Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, whenever it is that you are tuning in. Initially, for this week, we are going to cover energy and metabolism. This would discuss how we convert carbohydrates, fats, and sometimes protein into energy. However, we already covered a good bit of this at the end of week one when we covered digestion. So instead of beating the dead horse, let's move on to an introduction of weight management. What we're going to do is start by looking at some of the main principles that are related to weight management. We'll talk about some of the contributing factors to the overweight and obesity crisis in the United States, looking at things that generally are going to promote weight gain, an overweight status or obesity. And then from there, we'll look at some general dietary principles that promote weight management. In a nutshell, these strategies that we'll go over, they allow the internal mechanisms in our body that naturally control our weight to do their thing. So that weight management is a natural, low stress thing, and we don't go through hell trying to reach a healthy weight. So we'll just talk about some of the basics related to weight management this week. And then next week, what we'll do is we'll go into some more detailed things, looking at some general principles for people trying to lose weight that they can incorporate, or for people that are trying to gain weight that may need to do that. Um, so yeah, more general this week, and then next week it'll be a little bit more specific.
We're going to break this PowerPoint into 4 different sections. We're going to start by talking about obesity prevalence as a whole, and then also what obesity means. So just look at definitions. We're also going to look at how to determine weight status, and mainly we're going to compare BMI with body composition analysis. From there, we'll talk about specific strategies for weight management, and then we'll finish by going over some principles related to weight loss. Unfortunately, we can't get into too great of depth regarding weight loss because that's a huge concept with so many details and so many intricacies. But we are going to talk about what is sustainable for maintaining weight loss and some strategies that you should try to avoid if you ever do attempt to lose weight. To give an idea of obesity prevalence, we're going to have to jump back a little bit. Let's go back all the way to 1990. At this time, the Chicago Bulls were setting things in place for their first three-peat, and the White Sox had just drafted Frank Thomas. Things were good in the U.S., and on top of that, as a nation, we were healthy. What you are seeing in this picture here is the prevalence of obesity state by state in 1990. The darkest shade of blue that you see on the screen indicates an adult obesity rate of 10 to 14%, and light blue indicates an adult obesity rate of less than 10%, and white means that there's no data. Note that there was not a single state with an adult obesity rate of greater than 14% of the population. Now, as time passed, things would change. The White Sox did pull off a World Series win, and the Bulls dominated in the 90s, but the White Sox eventually went back to the bottom of their division, and Michael Jordan joined the Wizards. Obesity rates, in the meantime, skyrocketed to where states like Mississippi and West Virginia held an adult obesity rate of greater than 35% of the adult population. And you can see that the dark red indicates greater than 35%. And then also you have light red or orange, which indicates 30 to 35% of the population of adults is obese. Quite a change from 1990. So let's fast forward even a few more years, and now you have Iowa, Alabama, Louisiana, Oklahoma, and Arkansas that have joined the greater than 35% adult obesity party. At this time, only Colorado and Hawaii had adult obesity rates of less than 25% of their respective populations. What happened during this time was that there was an increase in the availability and portion sizes of fast food and processed food, and many experts expect that this in itself is the main contributing factor to the increased obesity rates in the United States. So what's the problem with obesity? Well, some of the more obvious complications are listed on the top right of this screen. Problems that are physically apparent or mechanical problems, and these include pain, reflux disease, and difficulty sleeping. Obesity is also related to problems that are somewhat less obvious, but statistically significant through research, and these include problems with education and employment. They're also related to disability and difficulty getting adequate life and health insurance. But there's also a lot more going on under the surface in obesity. Obesity can cause metabolic complications such as diabetes, high blood lipids or blood fats, hypertension, infertility, and cancer. And they're also related to mental complications such as mood disorder, anxiety disorder, ADD, sleep problems, and other personality issues. For part 3, we're going to talk about weight management, and this section is going to look more so at the weight maintenance side of things. We're going to talk about general healthy nutrition practices that anybody can incorporate that actually make maintaining weight more manageable, in addition to providing a variety of other health benefits. Specifically, we're going to look at how balance and nutrient density make weight management more feasible. Weight management can be more difficult in ways that we generally do not think much about. When we consume large amounts of sugar, our body releases insulin. This throws off everything like a toddler left to her own devices in a fine china store. One role of insulin is to help us store an appropriate amount of fat. Too much insulin, which occurs from eating too many carbohydrates, causes us to store excess amounts of fat. And high insulin release also causes us to crave more high sugar foods. To further complicate matters, long-term intake of high amounts of sugar makes us even more likely to experience these insulin-related complications. And then also, the processing of nutrients is going to generally decrease the amount of fiber, water, and protein in a food, and therefore we're going to miss out on a lot of the nutrients that make it more feasible for us to regulate our appetite. So we're more likely to overeat when we have less fiber, protein, and water. Dietary balance is a very simple concept that promotes both fullness and a hormonal balance that helps to control appetite. Dietary balance means getting the right proportions of various food groups. This means 1, getting a good balance of carbohydrates, fats, and protein, and 2, getting a good balance of starches, fruits, vegetables, and proteins. By controlling carbohydrate intake, we're going to control the insulin release, and therefore we limit the amount of fat storage, and we also regulate our appetite more naturally. Balance also encourages an adequate intake of non-starchy vegetables, foods that are low in calories and high in fiber, and also high in water content, and doing so is going to help to control our appetite. MyPlate is the perfect tool for optimizing dietary balance. The grains, dairy, and fruit sections, they provide carbohydrates, which give us energy and contain many nutrients that are unique to these foods. But since they are balanced out with non-starchy vegetables and protein, we are more likely to receive an optimal release of insulin. The non-starchy vegetables and protein have almost zero carbs in them. Protein foods help to induce satiety or fullness, and non-starchy vegetables have fiber and a high water content, both of which encourage satiety. On the lower right side of the screen, you have the MyPlate food model, which we base a great deal of our information from this class on. And above that is the MyPlate model refined by Harvard University, which places a greater emphasis on non-starchy vegetables, a lesser emphasis on fruit, and encourages us to drink more water and incorporate healthy fats. The concept of nutrient density is related to a diet that has a higher nutrient content and fewer unnecessary or processed calories. While you don't have to eat only nutrient-dense foods, you can reap the benefits of nutrient density by emphasizing nutrient-dense foods in your diet. Nutrient-dense foods contain greater amounts of fiber and water, both of which help to fill up our stomach and make us fuller. A diet that is higher in nutrient-dense foods is also a little higher in protein, generally. For example, refined grains lose some protein in the refining process and have a little less total protein compared to their whole counterparts. And finally, even though many of the other nutrients found in nutrient-dense foods may not have a direct role on weight management, they tend to encourage general overall improved health. And a healthier person is more likely to have less stress and reduced amounts of cortisol, a hormone that indirectly causes increased fat storage. Again, the big takeaway from nutrient density is to emphasize these foods in your diet, but being obsessive about including these foods is not necessarily beneficial. This graph provides an overview of how nutrient-dense various foods are, and how they stack up to one another in terms of nutrient density. Notice how even dairy foods, meats, and eggs are lower on the nutrient density spectrum. If you were to cut out these foods entirely, it would be very challenging to get an adequate amount of protein in your diet. So generally, limiting processed foods is an effective strategy for increasing nutrient content and also nutrient density. Here we have a great example of why limiting processed foods can help us achieve our weight goals most effectively. Look at the increases in portion sizes for various fast foods over the past 40 years. Also, consider the excess amount of added sugars and processed fats that these foods contain, nutrients that are specifically detrimental to weight management. And also keep in mind that vending machines generally carry 20-ounce bottles instead of their old size, the 12-ounce cans. In Amish communities where cars and other modern conveniences are not allowed, a typical adult takes between 14,000 and 18,000 steps a day, compared to only 3,000 to 5,000 steps of the typical office worker. The overall incidence of obesity among the Amish is only 4%. Given what we've just gone over, what do you think? Is weight loss just about balancing calories in with calories out? The final part of this week's lecture is going to take a look at some principles that are related to weight loss. This is a complex topic, and unfortunately we only have time to scratch the surface of this. Remember that calories are a unit of energy, so when we discuss energy, we are talking about calories. Weight management, in the very simplest of terms, can be summed up as the balance between energy or calories in and energy or calories out. So to achieve weight loss, we should be able to decrease energy in and maximize energy out. And this would work to a degree, but our body is far more complicated than that, and this focus alone would not provide ideal results. So in this section, we're going to take a look at some of the other factors at play when working towards weight loss. Unfortunately, the weight loss process itself is not simple, and there are a variety of strategies that simply do not work. Fad diets, in the vast majority of cases, and severe calorie restrictions are generally not centered on scientific principles that proven to provide successful weight loss. A person that's following these practices may experience some temporary initial weight loss, but they typically do not see long-term positive results. And the same holds true for cutting out an entire nutrient. Moderating carbohydrate or fat intake is not necessarily a bad idea, but cutting out an entire nutrient or food group is generally not sustainable. Eating sufficient amount of carbohydrates actually helps us to conserve muscle protein, and fat helps us to regulate hormonal balance, both of which are important principles of weight maintenance. Let's take a look at what happens internally when we attempt weight loss through excessive calorie restriction. There are two hormones that are related to weight management complications, and these are leptin and cortisol. Leptin is responsible for reducing hunger and for curbing appetite. Cortisol is the hormone that's released during periods of stress, which causes an internal release of sugar and therefore insulin. Please note that the following problems are related to an excessive calorie restriction, not to just a calorie restriction. When we restrict calories more than we should, we reduce the amount of leptin available to us and we increase cortisol. Leptin reduction makes us hungrier for longer periods of time, and a cortisol increase causes us to release more sugar, which causes extra insulin release. And the combination of the two make us more likely to store more body fat. Yo-yo dieting is the general principle of going on a fad diet or a severe calorie restriction for a certain amount of time. And what happens in doing that, because generally doing so is not centered around scientific and sustainable principles, is the person is going to lose the weight, but they're going to go through a great deal of stress while they do so. And just like an over-oppressed teenager, what's going to happen is the body is going to revolt, and there's going to be various chemicals and hormones that are released to store greater body fat and increase cravings to the point where what generally happens is the person regains the weight. And what's unfortunate about this is when the person regains the weight, they gain more body fat back than they do lean muscle. And lean muscle is generally lost when you're doing the weight loss from the wrong scientific principles in the first place. So the person may return to their former weight, but this time, even though they're at their former weight, they have lower muscle tissue and higher body fat. Weight loss is an incredibly complex topic and is so different for everybody because of the variations in size, activity, and genetics between different people. But this slide lists principles that can be applied by anybody. And they include control portions, but eat sufficient amounts. Have some protein, you don't need to go overkill with it though, but have some protein with each meal. Eat plenty of non-starchy vegetables, and this includes pretty much all the vegetables other than potatoes, carrots, peas, and corn. And that's not because these vegetables are necessarily bad. It's still okay to have these, but having too many of them will give you too many carbohydrates. So having some is okay, but not too many. Reducing refined sugar intake and alcohol, because both of these contain quite a few calories. Do regular, moderate exercise, even if it's only for 20 to 30 minutes a day. Doing some exercise is going to be beneficial. And only restrict your calorie intake by 500 to 1,000 calories maximum, less than what you would require per day. So if you require 2,500 calories, having about 1,500 calories to 2,000 calories per day would be an effective way to lose weight. But being very specific with numbers and very particular about things while you're going about weight loss is not necessarily beneficial, because you don't want to overstress. You want to incorporate balance, and in doing so, that will allow you to make your practices and make your weight loss sustainable so you keep it off once you actually lose it. Modeling meals after MyPlate is one of the simplest ways to make weight management more achievable. Modeling your meals in this fashion provides balance, which helps to regulate hunger, give you all the nutrients you need, and also make you satisfied. For more information on the best foods to fill each food group to achieve greater nutrient density, visit www.myplate.gov. Thanks for tuning in. Have a great rest of your week.